Thank you very much. Wow. Only in America does a Jewish kid from Minnesota speak in a Presbyterian church in Chicago to such a wonderful audience. Sometimes we should remember how special that is. I am going to speak tonight about my new book, which you've had introduced to you. It's called, it's so appropriate for a festival whose theme is speed. The book is called Thank You for Being Late. The subtitle's actually changed. It's now An Optimist's Guide to Thriving in the Age of Accelerations. So the first question, and this was always hard when you write a book, because I could have called it The World is Fast, but it felt like kind of derivative of The World is Flat. The first question I get from people always is, where did the title come from? And the title comes from actually meeting people in Washington, D.C. for breakfast over the past few years, and every once in a while someone would come 15, 20 minutes late. They say, Tom, I'm really sorry, it's the weather, the traffic, the subway, the dog ate my homework. And one day I just spontaneously said to one of them, actually, Jim, thank you for being late. Because you were late, I've been eavesdropping on their conversation. Fascinating. I've been people watching the lobby. Fantastic. And I just connected two ideas I've been struggling with for a month. So thank you for being late. People started to get into it. They'd say, well, you're welcome. Because they understood I was giving myself and them permission to pause. My favorite quote, one of my favorite quotes in the whole book is from my friend Dov Seidman, the author of How. And Dov likes to say, when you press the pause button on a computer, it stops. But when you press the pause button on a human being, it starts. It starts to reflect, to rethink, to reimagine. And this book was my attempt to press the pause button to do just that in this age of accelerations. And the book began with a pause and was triggered by a pause. Because I live in Bethesda, Maryland. I work out of the Washington Bureau of the New York Times. And almost 3 years ago now, I've been working on this book for a long time, I actually take the subway to work once a week, roughly. And that involves for me driving from our home on Bradley Boulevard in Bethesda to downtown Bethesda, and I park in the public parking garage beneath the Bethesda Hyatt. I did that, I went into DC, came back, driving out of the parking lot with my time-stamped ticket, went to the cashier's booth, handed my ticket to the cashier. He looked at it, looked at me, and said, I know who you are. I said, great. He said, I read your column. I said, great. He said, I don't always agree. I said, great, get me out of here. And I said, great, it means you have to check. Do you agree or not? And I drove off. Next week, I did my weekly subway trip, going to DC, come back, driving out of the parking lot, time-stamped ticket, same guy's there. This time I hand him the ticket, and he says, Mr. Friedman, I have my own blog. Would you read my blog? And I thought, oh my God, the parking guy is now my competitor. What just happened? So I said, well, write it down for me and I'll look at it. This is how the book begins. And he wrote it down for me. It's called odinambi.com. So I went home and I called it up. It turns out he was Ethiopian, from the Oromo people, and he wrote about Ethiopian politics from a real democracy point of view. So I thought about him for a week. I told my wife, Ann, I'd had this experience, and I thought about him, and I decided this was a sign from God. I should pause and engage this guy. But I didn't have his email, so the only way to engage him was park in the parking lot every day. So I parked in the parking lot. I don't remember if it took 3 or 4 days, but we finally overlapped. 7 a.m. in the morning, I stopped my car under the gate, Now I know his name. I said, Ayile, his name is Ayile Bogia. I want your email. I want to send you an email. And that night I sent him an email. And I basically said, I have a proposition for you. I will teach you how to write a column if you will tell me your life story. And he basically said, I see you're proposing a deal. I like this deal. And so we agreed to meet 2 weeks later near his office. I came from downtown DC. We met at Pete's Coffee House in Bethesda. And I presented him with a 6-page memo on how to write a column. And he told me his life story. Graduate of Haile Selassie University, I won't go into detail, was a real Oromo political activist, ended up basically getting forced out of the country, been living in America for 10 years, was blogging on Ethiopian websites, but they weren't fast enough. So he decided to start his own blog. I then presented him with my memo, which was actually the first of 3 meetings where we went over this and emailed back and forth. And I basically explained to him how I write a column, that the world for me is a big data set, and I was basically sharing with him my algorithm for making sense of it. And I explained to him that a news story is meant to inform. I can write a news story about the Chicago Humanities Festival, and it'll be better or worse, inform better or worse. But my business is a columnist. Columnist's job is to provoke. I'm either in the heating business or the lighting business. That's what I do, either heating or lighting. I'm either stoking up an emotion inside of you, or I'm illuminating something for you, and if I do it right, I'll produce either heat or light. And I'll know that I've done that if I get any one of a number of reactions. If you read my column, say I didn't know that, I never looked at it that way, I never connected those things. Your favorite, you said exactly what I felt but didn't know how to say, God bless you. I want to kill you and all your offspring. Any of those will tell you if you've produced heat or light. But I explained to him that to produce heat or light actually requires a chemical reaction. And you have to combine 3 compounds. I was really getting into the weeds of my own method. And I explained that the 3 compounds you have to combine are, first, what is your value set? How do you lean into the world? What is it you're promoting? Are you a communist, a capitalist, a libertarian, a neocon, a neoliberal, radical Trotskyite? What is the political philosophy you're promoting? Second, how do you think the machine works? So the machine is my shorthand for what are the biggest forces shaping more things in more places, in more ways, on more days. Because as a columnist, what I'm trying to do is take my value set and push the machine in that direction. And if I don't know how the machine works, I either won't push it or I'll push it in the wrong direction. And lastly, what have you learned about people? About people and culture, how the machine affects them and how they affect the machine. Stir those 3 together, let it rise, bake for 45 minutes, and if you do it right, you'll produce a column that produces heat or light. Where the book actually came from, because I had never actually gone through this and thought it through in this detail until I engaged Ayile. The more I engaged with him, the more I thought about it, the more I started to say to myself, well, if that's what a column's about, what is my value set? Where did it come from? How do I think the machine works today? And what have I learned about people and culture? And that's what the book is basically about. It's one giant column about the world. So I'm not going to talk to you tonight about my own value set. It's about growing up in St. Louis Park, Minnesota. That's where my values came from. Won't talk much about people and culture. We'll get into that a little. But because your theme is speed, what I want to talk to you about tonight is how I think the machine works today. What is shaping more things in more places, in more ways, on more days? And I think what is shaping more things in more places, in more ways, on more days, is that we are now in the middle of 3 nonlinear accelerations, all at the same time, with the 3 largest forces on the planet, which I call the market, Mother Nature, and Moore's Law. So Moore's Law, coined by Intel founder Gordon Moore, is that the speed and power of microchips will double every 24 months. He coined that law now 51 years ago, and it's still held up. If you put Moore's law on a graph, it looks like a hockey stick, just like that. The market for me is globalization, but the new globalization, not your grandfather's globalization, which was containers on ships and financial, transactions, but digital globalization, Facebook, Twitter, PayPal, everything that's being digitized now and globalized. If you put it on a graph, it looks like a hockey stick. And Mother Nature for me is climate change, biodiversity loss, and population growth. You put it on a graph, like 80 degrees in Chicago in October, it looks like a hockey stick. I think what is shaping more things in more ways in more places on more days is we're in the middle of 3 nonlinear accelerations in the 3 largest forces on the planet all at the same time. And they're all interacting with one another. More Moore's law drives more globalization drives more climate change, and more solutions to climate change. And these accelerations, they aren't just changing things. They are reshaping the world as we speak. So what I want to talk about are the accelerations and the reshaping. So let's quickly go through all 3. You have to begin with the acceleration in Moore's law. So the second chapter of the book is called What the Hell Happened in 2007? 2007? This is an utterly innocuous year. 2007? What's this guy talking about? Who in the world would care about 2007? Well, here's what happened in 2007. The chapter begins actually in a soccer field in Palo Alto where Steve Jobs, in December of 2006, is showing John Doerr, pulls out of his pocket something he calls the iPhone, and explains to John Doerr, one of the principals of Kleiner Perkins hedge fund, John, this phone almost destroyed our company. And he explains its capabilities, and John is blown away, and immediately offers to start a fund for apps for this phone. And Jobs said, I don't want any apps on this phone. I don't want anyone touching this beautiful phone. A few weeks later at the Moscone Center in January 2007, he unveiled the iPhone to the world. Here's what also happened in 2007. A company called Facebook that was confined to high schools and universities, actually late 2006, opened itself to the world and went global. In 2007, a company called Twitter was split off on its own independent platform and went global. In 2007, a company called GitHub, now the world's largest library repository of open source software, opened its doors. In 2007, a company called Hadoop, named after the founder's son's toy elephant, opened its doors and basically laid the foundation for big data. In 2007, someone named Jeff Bezos came out with a product called the Kindle. In 2007, Google bought a company called YouTube. In 2007, Google came out with its own operating system called Android. In 2007, Michael Dell retired in 2005, but when he saw everything happening in 2007, decided he had to come out of retirement. In 2007, a company called Airbnb opened its doors. In 2007, IBM started the first cognitive computer called Watson. In 2007, if you see a graph of the cost of sequencing a human genome, it looks like this. It's a waterfall. Look at the date of the year down at the bottom, 2007. Look at a graph for the growth of cloud computing. Looks like that. Look at the date it starts, 2007. And in 2007, Intel, for the first time, went off silicon in its chips to extend Moore's law. 2007, my friends, may be seen in time. Oh, by the way, in 2007, solar energy, if you look at a graph of solar energy, it explodes starting in 2007. 2007 may be seen in time as the single greatest technological inflection point since Gutenberg invented the printing press. And we completely missed it because of 2008. Right after this, we go into the greatest economic crisis since the Great Depression. Everything freezes. And so what happens is our physical technologies leap ahead, giving us the speed that your festival is about, and everything around it gets frozen. All the social technologies, the political technologies that we need to govern and get the most out of these accelerations and cushion the worst get frozen. And we end up with a huge social dislocation. People feel the ground moving under their feet in their workplace, in their school, in their city, in their community, and no one is explaining it to them. No one even knows what's going on. And we're obsessed with the economic crisis of 2008. We are living in that gap right now. So what produced 2007? Well, my friends Eric Brynjolfsson and Andy McAfee wrote a great book about the Moore's Law side of this, called The Second Machine Age. What they basically argue is the first machine age was built on the steam engine, which doubled in power roughly every 70 years. But the second machine age, which we're in right now, is built on the microchip, which doubles in power under Moore's Law every 24 months. Now, every 27, every 30 months, but roughly still accelerating. One of the hardest things for human beings to grasp is the power of something that grows exponentially. And the story they use in their book to demonstrate that is the story of the man who invented the game of chess. And he gave the game to the king, and the king loved it and said, "How can I reward you, dear sir?" And he said, "Your Highness, all I want to do is be able to feed my family." He said, "Well, what would you like?" And he said, "Very simple, Your Highness. Just take 1 grain of rice and put it on the first square of this chessboard. Then put 2 on the second, 4 on the next, 8 on the next, 16 on the next. Keep doubling it, my family will be fine." The king said, "It shall be done," not realizing that when you double something 63 times, just 63 times, the number you get is close to 18 quintillion. More rice than existed in the world. And what Andy and Eric argue is this doubling, we are now in the second half of the chessboard, where the numbers get really, really big. And you start to see really funky stuff. You start to see cars that can drive themselves. You start to see machines that have all 5 senses. So the folks at Intel, to demonstrate to people the power of an exponential, decided one day their engineers took a 1971 VW Beetle and said, what if this Beetle's capabilities improved at the same rate of Moore's Law and microchips from 1971? They concluded that that Beetle today would get 2 million miles per gallon, it would go 300,000 miles an hour, and it would cost 4 cents. That is the power of exponential technological doubling. And by the way, you could drive it your entire life on a single tank of gas. So that's the kind of technological exponential that we are in. And what I basically try to explain in the book is that it isn't just the chips that are in exponential. Software is in the same kind of acceleration. Sensory devices are in the same kind of acceleration. Storage is in the same kind of acceleration, and networking is in the same kind of acceleration. And basically what happened is that they all converged in the year 2000 into something we call the cloud. The cloud. I never use the term the cloud because it sounds so soft, so cuddly, so benign. It sounds like a Joni Mitchell song. I've looked at clouds from both sides. This ain't no cloud, folks. This is what I call in the book, my friend Craig Mundy from Microsoft coined this term, this is a supernova. Supernova is the largest force in nature. It's the explosion of a star. Only this is an ever-accelerating supernova. And it is now at the center of everything, driving these accelerations. Basically what happened between 2000 and 2007, as a result of these accelerations in technology, were two price collapses. The first I wrote about in 2005. It was the collapse in the price of connectivity. And that was driven by a collapse in the price of fiber optic cable as a result of the dot-com boom, bubble, and bust. We didn't mean to, but honey, I shrunk the world. Okay? And what we did, because of that price collapse, was we made connectivity fast, free, easy for you, and ubiquitous. Suddenly you could connect with anyone, anywhere, anytime for almost free. What happened in 2007 was another price collapse. It was a collapse in the price of compute and storage. And it made complexity fast, free, easy for you, and invisible. The first price collapse enabled us to wake up one morning and say, oh my God, I'm being touched by people I never touched before, and I'm able to touch people I could never touch before. And in 2007, we woke up and said, oh my God, look at all the things I can do with one touch. Uber, one touch. Think of the complexity that goes into that one touch of that Uber button. We've made complexity fast, free, easy for you, and invisible, and we're doing it everywhere. And when you put those two together, you get a release of energy into the hands of human beings that we've never seen before. And it changes four kinds of power. It changes the power of one, what one person can do now to make things or break things is scary. It changes the power of machines. As I said, machines now have all five senses. We've never had that before. It changes the power of many. We as a collective are now a force of and in nature. We have a geological era being named after us, the Anthropocene. And lastly, it changes the power of flows. Ideas now flow and circulate and change people's minds in ways we've never seen before. Barack Obama ran for president saying marriage is between a man and a woman. He will leave office saying marriage is between any two human beings who love each other, and he will follow Ireland in that opinion. Think of how fast a centuries-old convention has now changed. Those four kinds of power are reshaping everything. The second acceleration, as I said, is the acceleration in globalization, and it's digital globalization. You know the story. In 1995, there were 35 million people on the internet. Today, there are over 3 billion. In 1995, 80 million people had mobile devices. Today, there are over 7 billion. That's roughly one for every person on the planet, but we know not everyone has them because a lot of you have two. And what this acceleration in globalization has done is fundamentally created a new energy source. It is that supernova. So in the Middle Ages, where did you want to build your town? You wanted to build your town on a river, because that river gave you transportation, nourishment, ideas, and energy. You wanted to build your town on the Amazon. Today, you want to build your town, your country, or your company on Amazon.com. Okay? You want to build it on the digital flows coming out of globalization now. Because the world today is all about who's in touch with the flows, not the stocks. This is an idea of John Hagel and John Seeley Brown. We've moved from a world of stocks to flows. See, it used to be, I had all the stocks and I stored up all these stocks. I stored up stocks of education. I went to college for 8 years, and I had this stock of education. Then I spent it the rest of my life. Or my country had all these stocks of natural resources. Stocks are less and less important because your energy, ideas, and your power will now come from being in touch with the flows off the supernova. And the third acceleration, I won't go into detail on this because you're all living it, is the acceleration in climate, biodiversity loss, and Mother Nature. I begin that chapter with the story of this town in Iran on July 31st, 2015, Bandar Mashar, where the heat index was 163 degrees. We've been keeping average temperature records. I used to have this on the tip of my tongue, but for something like 60 6,000 months or something like that. And the last 3 months have been the highest average temperatures of all 6,000. So we all know where that acceleration goes. Now, as I said, what I think these 3 accelerations are doing is they aren't just changing the world, they're reshaping it. And what the second half of the book is about is how they're reshaping 5 realms in particular: geopolitics, politics, the workplace, ethics, and community. And because of this reshaping, I think we need to be reimagining all 5. And it makes you weep when you think of the reimagining we need to do, and you look at the election we're having, and you see the deficit of the work we have to do and how we're approaching this problem. So let me quickly share with you some outlines of those, how I reimagine all 5. So let's start with politics. I believe we are not just in the middle of one climate change. We're actually in the middle of 3 climate changes at once. The change in the climate of technology, there's a change in the climate of globalization, and there's a change in the actual climate. So the more I thought about that, the more I said to myself, well, if we're in the middle of these climate changes, what is it you want when the climate changes? You want 2 things. You want resilience. You want to be able to take a blow, because in climate change you get a lot of disruption, but you also want propulsion. You don't want to be just curled up in a ball. You want to be able to advance as an individual, a society, a community. So I thought about, who do I consult about how you thrive, how do you get the most out of climate change and cushion the worst? Who do I consult? And then I realized I knew a woman. She's 3.8 billion years old. Her name's Mother Nature, and she's dealt with more climate changes than anybody. So I sat her down and I interviewed her. I said, Mother Nature, how do you thrive? How do you build resilience and propulsion when the climate changes? She says, oh, Tom, well, first of all, I'm incredibly adaptive through natural selection in a very brutal way. Second, she says, I love diversity and pluralism. I try 20 different species, I see who wins. Third, she says, I'm incredibly entrepreneurial. Wherever I see an opening, I fill it with a plant or animal perfectly adapted to that niche. She says, I love coevolution. I put the right birds with the right trees. I put the right bees with the right flowers. Things are resilient when they co-evolve. She says, I'm incredibly sustainable. Everything is circular. Everything is food. Eat food, poop seed. Eat food, poop seed. She's very sustainable, Mother Nature. She says, I'm incredibly patient. Nothing strong can be built fast. Not the baobab tree that can live for 1,000 years. You certainly can't speed up the gestation of an elephant. And lastly, she says, I do believe in the laws of bankruptcy. I kill all my failures, and I return them to the great manufacturer in the sky, and I take their energy and nourish my successes. Lastly, she says, I'm incredibly hybrid and heterodox. I'll mix anything with anything. So my conclusion from that is that the countries, companies, and communities that will thrive in the age of acceleration are those whose politics most closely mirrors Mother Nature's killer apps. And what I do in the rest of the chapter is invent Mother Nature's political party. If Mother Nature was running in this election, what would her platform be if you approached it the way Mother Nature does? Well, I won't go into all the details, but let me explain to you my own politics, which Jim alluded to. Because I am actually to the left of Bernie Sanders on some issues, and at the same time to the right of the Wall Street Journal editorial page. I believe ideas that must co-evolve should co-evolve, that that's what will produce both resilience and propulsion. So I'm actually for single-payer health care. But to pay for it, I would, no, God, because you didn't hear the next line. Because to pay for it, I would abolish all corporate taxes and replace them with a carbon tax, a tax on sugar, a tax on bullets, and a small financial transaction tax. I think we need to get radically entrepreneurial over here to pay for the safety nets we're going to need over here, because the age of acceleration is going to be too fast for some people. So I'm utterly hybrid, heterodox, and think that ideas that should co-evolve must co-evolve. But our politics is such that for fundraising and station identification, if you're for single payer, you have to be for corporate taxes, and if you're for corporate taxes abolition, you have to be against single payer. That's crazy. And Mother Nature would say so. And if we are going to thrive in the age of acceleration, we have got to mimic her strategies for thriving, and that is to be utterly heterodox, hybrid, and letting the best ideas co-evolve wherever they come from. Mother Nature, remember, at the end of the day, only has one rule. Only the adaptive survive. And right now, our politics is the opposite of adaptive. So my chapter on geopolitics and the reshaping of the world of geopolitics comes from, I'm 63, I grew up on Get Smart, Don Adams, Agent 86. I see some of you are there, look like my contemporaries out there. Who can remember the name of the organization that Agent 99 worked for? It was called Control. And do you remember who their worldwide enemy was? It was called Chaos. Oh, the authors of that TV show were ahead of their time. Because the new divide in the world today is no longer east-west, north-south, communist, capitalist. The new geopolitical divide in the world today is between the world of control and the world of chaos. What I call the world of order and the world of disorder. Now, why is this happening? It's because of these three accelerations. Because what's happened is that the 50 years after World War II, World War I and World War II birthed, we know, many, many nation states. Out of all these empires and colonial systems came what we have today, 192 or more individual nation states. And the 50 years after World War II, the Cold War, were a great time to be a weak state, a weak new state. Why? Because there were two superpowers competing for your affection every day, throwing money at you, educating your kids at Patrice Lumumba University or the University of Illinois, giving you foreign aid, rebuilding your army. If you were Syria, you could lose 3 wars to Israel, and suddenly, you would, they'd rebuild your army, and you could, the climate was quiet, and China wasn't in the WTO, so it couldn't take your low-wage labor. Forget all of that. It's all gone now. No superpower wants to touch you because all you win is a bill. Populations have now exploded. Mother Nature is hammering you. China can take away your low-wage labor. And your population now has gone from demographic dividend to demographic deficit. So these three accelerations are like a tornado, and these weak states are basically like caravan homes in a trailer park. They're built on a slab of cement with no foundation and no basement. And my accelerations now are blowing through this trailer park just like a tornado. And it starts in West Africa and the Sahel and extends all the way to the border of India, creating vast zones of disorder where tens of thousands of people are trying to escape to get into the world of order. And the Mediterranean is now the dividing line. I have a documentary coming out November 9th on National Geographic, where I followed human migrants from villages in northern Senegal through Niger up to the Libyan border, where they try to get through Libya into Europe. It's a harrowing story, 10,000 a month. This is not a Middle East problem. This is an Africa problem, and these communities are being hammered by climate change. So how we manage the order and the challenge of order and disorder, I can go into that in more detail later, but that is the central geopolitical challenge. I've just got a few minutes left for my talk, so let me touch on 2 things that I think are quite relevant, and then we'll have time for a few questions. One is the workplace, because the workplace is being reshaped. And that chapter is called How We Turn AI into IA. How do we turn artificial intelligence into intelligent assistance, ANCE, to lift every worker so he or she can thrive in the age of acceleration? How do we turn AI into IA, intelligent assistance, ANTS, give people tools that will allow them, enable them, and empower them to lift their own line? And lastly, how do we create intelligent algorithms in order to enable people, again, to thrive in the workplace in the age of acceleration? So my example of intelligent assistance is the human resources policies of AT&T. Spent a lot of time at AT&T. It's a very interesting company, 360,000 employees. They live in a highly competitive world right next to the supernova. They feel its heat every day. They wake up every morning competing with Verizon, Deutsche Telekom, Sprint, T-Mobile. This, in a nutshell, is AT&T's human resources policy, and trust me, it's coming to a company near you. Their CEO every year, Randall Stevenson, begins with a speech about radically transparent, this is where we're going, this is our business is changing, these are going to be the jobs of the future in our company. Secondly, they put every AT&T employee on their own in-house LinkedIn system. They can now look down and say, Tom, you've got 7 of the 10 skills you're going to need in the AT&T of the future, but you're missing 3. Then they created an in-house university in partnership with Udacity and created nano degrees for all 10 of those things, so I can now take them and upgrade my own skills. There's just one condition. They'll give me $8,500 a year to take those classes, but I have to take them on my own time. And if I'm not interested in taking those classes because I'm tired of climbing up telephone poles, AT&T now has a lovely severance package for me. But I won't be working at AT&T anymore. Their social contract with their workers now is very simple. You can be a lifelong employee, but only if you're a lifelong learner. And that is going to be the new social contract, I think, for society at large. I can talk more about this in detail in the Q&A. Let me close with one of my favorite parts of the book in terms of writing, and it's on how these accelerations are reshaping ethics. And the chapter is called, Is God in Cyberspace? And it comes from a speech I gave in Portland, Oregon in 1999 or 2000, I don't remember. The book, I was out talking about Lexus and the Olive-Tree. I was at the Portland Theater in downtown Portland, and a young man stood up in the balcony in question time and said, Mr. Friedman, I have a question. Is God in cyberspace? 1999. I thought, wow. I don't know. Is God in cyberspace? I said, I've never been asked that before. Is God in cyberspace? He said, I don't know how to answer you. I felt like kind of an idiot. So I came home and I called my spiritual teacher. He's a Rabbi Tzvi Marks. He lives in Amsterdam. I met him when I was the New York Times correspondent in Jerusalem from the Hartman Institute. He's married to a Dutch priest in Amsterdam. He's a very interesting guy, brilliant Talmudic scholar. I called him up in Amsterdam. I said, Tzvi, I got this question and I didn't know how to answer. Is God in cyberspace? What should I have said? And he said, well, Tom, in our faith community, we have 2 concepts of the Almighty, a biblical concept and a post-biblical concept. The biblical view of the Almighty is that He's almighty. He smites evil and rewards good. And if that's your view of God, He sure isn't in cyberspace, which is full of pornography, gambling, lying, cheating, prevarication. But he said, thank God we have a post-biblical view of the Almighty. And the post-biblical view is that God manifests Himself by how we behave. So if you want God to be in cyberspace, we have to bring Him there by how we behave there. So I took that quote and I put it in the paperback edition of the Lexus and the Olive-Tree, and then I forgot about it. Over the last few years, especially as I started working on this book, I found myself spontaneously just telling that story. And I finally asked myself, why? And of course, the answer was obvious. And it was for 2 reasons. Now that everything is being digitized in the supernova, we're doing everything now. More and more things every day in cyberspace. In other words, we're now interacting with each other, families globally, in a realm where everyone's connected and no one's in charge. And therefore, what ethics and values happen there and are in charge there and shape our behaviors really are going to matter. But much more importantly, because the supernova is changing the power of one. In 1945, we entered a world where one country could kill all of us, post-Hiroshima. And if it had to be one country, I'm glad it was mine. But friends, we're entering a world. We're not there yet, but we're entering a world where one person can kill all of us. And at the same time, all of us could fix everything. Leveraging the power of the supernova, we are now entering a world where one of us could kill all of us. And if we applied our mind to it, all of us could fix everything. We could actually feed, house, and clothe every person on the planet. And what does that mean? It means values really matter. It means we have never been more godlike as a species. And if we are going to be godlike, we better have the golden rule. We now live in a world where more people can do unto you from farther away than ever before. And we live in a world where you now can do unto others farther away than ever before. So I gave this talk as a commencement speech at Olin College of Engineering this year, and I looked out at the crowd and I said, I know what you're thinking. I paid $200,000 to get my kid an education at this engineering school, and some knucklehead is promoting the golden rule. Is there anything more naive? Actually, there isn't, because naivete is the new realism. I'll tell you what's really naive. Thinking in a world where we get this much distributed power and this many people connected, and thinking we're going to be okay if the golden rule doesn't scale and make a comeback. Now that's naive. How does the golden rule make a comeback? And this is what the last part of the book is about. That depends 99% in my view on two things. Families, that's nothing I can fix. And healthy communities. Because when people are embedded in a healthy community, when they feel connected, protected, and respected, that's precisely when they will practice the golden rule. And so my book really ends with that theme. It has a theme song, my book. I thought of trying to buy it, so when you open the book, it would play this song like a Hallmark card plays Happy Birthday. And the song is by Brandi Carlile. I'm a big Brandi Carlile fan. The song is called I, E-Y-E. And the main refrain is, you wrapped your love around me like a chain, but I never was afraid that it would die. You can dance in a hurricane, but only if you're standing in the eye. And what we are being asked to do today, friends, is to dance in a hurricane of 3 accelerations. Donald Trump is selling a wall to that hurricane. My book is selling an I, healthy community. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. We have folks with microphones, and if people have questions, we have time to...
Thank you very much. I'm curious, given that you brought up the new training program at AT&T, and then you touched on education toward the end of your talk, what role you see for the new education that will have to address these forces of change, and particularly, can you address the role of the humanities, since we are at the Humanities Festival, within that education?
Sure. Well, I don't really get into it in the book directly, that sort of specific education, but it's a very valid and important question. And I'm a huge believer in the humanities for many reasons, partly because I was a student of the humanities, but most important because of what I tripped over in writing this book. And what I found, I talked to so many tech companies and different kind of companies and people, and And you know what I found? That the most important differentiating thing was not the speed of your microchip or your machine or whatever. It was actually human-to-human connections. That they were the big differentiator. The way I like to put it is that what really matters more when the world gets fast is everything you can't download. Everything you have to upload the old-fashioned way. Church, synagogue, temple, mosque, good parenting, healthy community. Those are the things that are going to differentiate one family, one student, one school, one community. Let me give you a couple of examples. I profile in the chapter on work a company called LearnUp.com. So if you go to big retail companies today, the Gap, Old Navy, Walmart, the human resources policies of these companies, they're basically to weed people out, not to weed people in. They just get bombarded with tens of thousands of online applications. So LearnUp was started to filter those out. And what they did was actually created a kind of a 2-hour test. If you want to apply for a job at Old Navy, first you have to take a test, because it turns out everyone thinks they could work at Old Navy, but people actually didn't know how to operate a cash register, didn't know how to fold a shirt, didn't know how to relate to a customer. So if you want to apply for a job, first you have to take this test. And only after you pass it, then LearnUp actually schedules an interview for you with Old Navy. Well, Old Navy discovered just asking people to do that filtered out so many people, and also just upgraded the applicant pool. But Alexis Ringwald, who started this company, told me, if you go to their dashboard, they actually have a button up here in the right corner, and it's the button that's pressed most often, and it's called the coach button. Turns out everybody needs a coach, and it's actually a human being. Coach, what do I do? How do I dress for my interview? Coach, what if I'm going to be late? Coach, what might the first question be? I actually list in the book all the questions people ask the coach. These human-to-human things, I think the best jobs in the future, in fact, there's a lot of data on this, I don't think this, I know it, are going to be what I call STEMpathy jobs. Jobs that combine STEM education and empathy. STEM and humanities. STEM and the ability to interact with another human being. It's great that Watson has read every article on cancer ever published. But who's the doctor who's going to be able to ask Watson the right questions and then translate the answers for another human being? So I think the jobs that combine the two, people who can combine the two, are going to be the most valuable. One of my favorite polls is a poll that Gallup did about 5 years ago now. Gallup does a huge amount of education polling, and they did this giant poll of people out of college for, I believe it was either 4 or 5 years. And they asked people, are you happy with the direction of your life? Your career, excuse me. And then they weeded out all the people who said yes, and then they drilled down to see what they had in common. First thing they discovered was where they went to school had zero correlation with whether they were happy with their career trajectory 4 years out of college. The two things that were differentiators were, one, had you had an internship in your field of interest somewhere along the way, and the second was, did you have a mentor who had taken an interest in your hopes and dreams? And there's a message in that bottle, you know. And so people can get all excited about the whiz-bang tech stuff. I can really riff on that, you know. But it's actually all the stuff you can't download that's going to matter more than ever, the faster the world gets.
Your remarks seem to me to have a certain percentage of the market which is open to hearing what you have to
I'll
say
repeat his question.
about these forces. But my question is we have another segment of the market that seems to be buying a Trump message of a different kind and not so open, and would probably respond to you as another one of those elite guys, not in touch with our reality. Mm-hmm. How do you get to those? Because if we are to respond to the kind of things that you're talking about, mm-hmm. that segment
Yes.
somehow got to be brought around.
It's a very good question. Did everyone hear that in the back? Yeah, he wanted to know when my book will be out, and it's thank you. Thank you so much for asking. It's November 22nd, and you can order it now on Amazon.com. Okay. No, the question, and it's a very good one, is I've got my message, but Trump has his, and it's a different message. And it's obviously resonating with a lot of people, not just a few. If you take the polls, over 40% of the American people. So I will just give you my sense of what is propelling the Trump phenomena and take it for what it's worth. I think there is in the country today a profound sense, I'm going to coin a word here, of what I call stuckness. Stuckness. Just feels like we're stuck. Our politics is just stuck. And I have my own views on who stuck it and why they stuck it and whatnot. I won't get into that. And Trump has come along and presented himself as King Arthur, who can pull the sword from the stone. I'm a builder, I'm a billionaire, I know how to get stuff done. I know how to unstick what's stuck. And that's a very powerful subliminal message that he sends, and I think it's resonated. And I understand why at some level. I think the second pervasive sense in the country, and it's a byproduct of what I've talked about here, is a sense of homelessness. Not people living on the streets, although that is clearly a problem, but people existentially homeless. I'm in the men's room in North Carolina, and there's someone next to me who looks like a woman. I happen to be glad that we have opened these things up personally, because I think a lot of other people were feeling homeless for a different reason, people in the LGBT community. But that shift, that cultural shift, was really fast for a lot of people. Too slow for me, too fast for a lot of other people. And I'm in the grocery store. Everyone's speaking Spanish around me. I love it. Love immigration, pro-immigration. For a lot of people, it's what happened to my store, you know? I'm at office, and I just got an email from a colleague, and it actually was fixing a lunch date, and it's actually from her bot, you know? Isn't even a person. New York Times ran a test a few months ago. They gave lines of poetry, and they said which was written by a human and which by a machine. So I think all of these things, these rapid changes of ideas, social mores, and conventions, they're just too fast for a lot of people. And I understand that. And I'll get back to this in a second. The third thing I think is going on is a terrible trend in the country, and that is entertainment has become politics, and politics has become entertainment. And so we can't really distinguish the two, and that's why we have a reality TV guy running, and some days he acts like he's out of reality TV, some day he acts like he's in politics. And how many people just, Trump even boasts of this, they come to my rallies because they're fun. It's entertainment, it's World Federation Wrestling, whatever you want to call it. It's so I think all three of those things are kind of really what's underlying this. But you asked a deeper question. What do we do about that? You know, and what I try to do in my book is, first of all, understand the forces that are shaping this. And I didn't have a time to talk about this today, but the last two chapters of the book are all about where my values came from. So I grew up in this little town, suburb really of Minneapolis, called St. Louis Park. And in this suburb, in the late 50s, 60s, and early 70s, grew up alongside of me. We all went to the same school or Hebrew school. The Coen brothers, Al Franke, Norm Ornstein, Michael Sandel of Harvard, Alan Weinstein, Peggy Ornstein, Dan Wilson, who wrote Someone Like You with Adele. It was a freaky place, okay? So the Coen brothers movie, A Serious Man, was about our Hebrew school. And I tell the story of St. Louis Park. And the short story is that in the late 40s and 50s, the Jews of Minneapolis all lived in basically a ghetto in the north side with a black African-American community. And my parents went to a school that was, fully mixed of the two. In the 50s, all the Jews move out basically en masse in a 3-year period, and they move to one suburb, St. Louis Park, the only one that didn't have redlining, that they could move in. Jews could get in, the blacks couldn't. So overnight, a suburb that was 100% Protestant, Catholic, white, Scandinavian, basically, becomes 20% Jewish, Protestant, Catholic, and white Scandinavian. If Finland and Israel had a baby, it would be St. Louis Park, okay? And out of this crazy clash came the Coen brothers, myself, Ornstein, all these weirdos, basically. And I tell the story of how we built a community, an amazingly inclusive community that propelled a lot of people. And if you go to the Wikipedia page of St. Louis Park, I'm not just talking about those people. It's an amazing place. Then I come back 40 years later, and I say, what's going on in St. Louis Park? Well, now my high school, same high school, is 50% white, Protestant, Catholic, Scandinavian. It's 10% Hispanic now. It's 10% Jewish, and it's 30% Somali and African American. Because the same suburb that was ready to take the Jews took the Somali refugees. Now, the inclusion challenge is much more challenging. The chasm we have to bridge is culturally, religiously, racially much deeper. And I tell the story of how they're doing. And it's a mixed picture, but it's not a bad picture. And it's really, now my suburb isn't some freaky outlier. Now it's America. That inclusion challenge, that's now the story of America. And guess what? It's actually becoming the story of the world. And so I tell the story of how my suburb in Minneapolis are now wrestling with this challenge. I said that the book is out, the story is not done. I am more optimistic than not. You know, my friend Amory Lovins, a great physicist, likes to say, when people ever ask him, are you an optimist or a pessimist? Amory always says, I'm neither. Because they're just two different forms of fatalism. Everything's going to be great. Everything's going to be awful. Amory says, I believe in applied hope. Applied hope. I'm hopeful, and what I found in my little town and in Minneapolis more broadly is that a lot of people applying hope. Don't know if they're going to make it, but I'm so impressed at the number of people who want to get caught trying. And that's what I really resent, frankly, about the sort of Trump as a person. Because there's a lot of people trying to get caught trying, doing the right things, not dividing people, not calling people names, not denigrating them, but bringing them together. It's really hard work. Don't know if they're going to make it. So if you want to be an optimist about America, stand on your head. Because the country looks so much better from the bottom up than from the top down. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks so much.